Okay, you're all on now, so we can all smile. And okay, so for those who have not been here before, we've been doing this for about 5 years, but those who have not been here before, I give an introduction as sort of. I try and keep it short, not always successfully. This is a huge topic, and and what I do is I go over many different interpretations of interpretations, and you afterwards we all have a discussion about it. You
Oh,
can agree, disagree, put in more things I didn't mention. There are lots of things I won't mention, but anyway, um, so that's it. So the spoiler is in the title. I maintain that everything is interpretation. Everything. Um, Interpretation is a filter. I call it a permanent continuum. It's not a veil, but a filter through which each of us individually perceive the world in all its manifestations.
Could I make a comment?
Already?
Yes,
Yes.
George. I think that I agree with you on one level, but I think another term that could be used in association to kind of to further expand the idea of interpretation is framework, because that's a little different. It's a kind of,
Um,
it involves many interpretations, but it's a different kind of way of using space and matter. I just want to
I haven't started yet, so could you please wait till I say something?
yes.
Okay.
Thank you
It'll,
for listening.
it'll make it easier for everybody. Hi there, James. Right.
hi.
Um, Nietzsche said, there are no facts, only interpretations, which is, in a way, big way, similar, akin to a postmodern view. No facts, only interpretations. Everything is observed through the lens of the individual, subjectively. Even a mirror image is an interpretation, which I will go into a bit later. As John Stuart Mill put it, there is no such thing as an absolute certainty, but there is assurance sufficient for the purposes of human life. We can never fully express what we mean without altering it. There may be no access even to our own thoughts without some form of interpretation. If all thought is interpreted, even within the self, then what counts as objective truth or pure meaning becomes deeply questionable. What does it mean for something to be known, i.e., true? The largely accepted definition is justified true belief. But there are lots of problems with this when we consider the ubiquity of interpretation. Justified to whom? To whom? For whom? True. For whom? Belief. What does that mean when everything is interpreted, as I think it is? Let me talk for a couple of minutes about the problem of definitions. It strikes me as interestingly frustrating that in many discussions about serious issues, for example, consciousness, free will, mind, time, nothing, someone invariably comes up with a demand to define your terms, and that sort of stops everybody. So, but how do we do that? By looking them up in a dictionary? But surely, if that did the trick, we wouldn't need the discussion at all. When we are asked to define our terms, that is basically asking us to say what we mean by the word or words that refer to the topic we are discussing. There is, though no definite agreed meaning for anything that we can think of, since that would assume the existence of objective and universally agreed upon meanings. Obviously, there aren't. Words are necessarily interpretation of one's thoughts, which reflect knowledge as such. They are individual interpretations and necessarily approximate. We could now ask, interpretations of what? Can we assume that there are objectively real meanings behind our interpretations? The answer would have to be that probably there aren't. Interpretations are of other interpretations, each of which is a current fact without a natural cycle of inherent human uncertainty. We do, though, constantly strive for certainty, for boundaries, which is why definitions of words supply such ready satisfaction. Such definitions, the requested define your terms ones, are those set out in dictionaries and convey abstract conceptual boundaries in the guise of a definite meaning. So while a definition may help clarify the concept, classifications are nevertheless interpretations which, while continuously being subject to language change, involuntarily impose mental boundaries around definitions. In some way, then, definitions are tinged with bias and so stack the deck in favor of a particular approach as dangerous. If everything is interpretation, there is no originality. We all stand on the shoulders of what came before. Which brings me to time. I put forward the idea that our present state, that is, which we feel to be the present, is an interpretation of our past and its predicted future. Information comes to each of us individually and is reinterpreted by each of us to be sent due to others in its interpreted form to be reinterpreted again. And so it goes on. So the concept of objectivity is a non-starter. All of science is based on interpretations governed by the inherent instabilities of language. Approximation must be an interpretation of a fact, which obviously doesn't exist. This cannot be a popular view among physicists. The philosopher of science, Tim Maudling, is dead against the notion of interpretations of quantum mechanics. He says that they are simply different theories. This to me is strange, since he's a strong realist for whom the universe exists even when there are no observers. How is that possible? I don't know. Perhaps we'll do a Zoom meeting sometime about realism, anti-realism, idealism. Maybe. If there is an interpretation, there must be something that is being interpreted. Yes, as something, but not necessarily an immutable fact. What could that be? How far down do we need to go till we get that fact, that absolute and objective truth? Can we ever get to the Kantian thing in itself? Let me mention Quine's well-known interdependency of translation argument. The idea that there may be meaningfully different but equally correct translations. Meaningfully different but equally correct translations of one language into another. Quine's considered view is that all objects are theoretical. Even our most primordial objects, bodies, are already theoretical, which in my terms would mean interpretable. Religion is all about interpretation. Yuval Harari gives examples of the Bible and continual interpretation in order to make it objectively real, believable. Let me give you an example from the Jewish religion, which is very clear with interpretations. The Ten Commandments were given by God, and then there was the codification of the oral law, which was equally correct, in inverted commas. Then it was reinterpreted to the Talmud, and then it was reinterpreted by individual sages, the rabbis, each of which had their own interpretation followed by their followers. So the interpretation of interpretation, and that is the religion. So if evidence in the old days had been what was written in the Bible and conveyed to the people by priests, it was now shown that there could also be mathematical and scientific evidence that clearly clashed. It indicated the uncomfortable fact that if one was true, the other one was false. It was about knowledge. It's still about knowledge. What do we know and how do we know it? And basically, it's about who or what, which authority we turn to for information. Evidence. But that needs interpretation. Forensic evidence is questioned by a second forensic expert. Medical evidence needs a second opinion. Is evidence merely an opinion? History is interpretive. It's a subjective account of what happened. A lot of mendacious interpretation, by the way. Subjectivity is a reflection of ourselves, a mirror of us, interpreting us to ourselves, which is why our supposed objectivity is a way of us interpreting our subjective views. A mirror bounces back what we are, said or did, but slightly less clearly. I call it subjective objectivity, which is more than just coming to terms with someone else's views. It is two sides of the coin that are in fact one. We can predict the future. We can't predict the future, sorry. When we get to what we predicted, it is the past. We never get to tomorrow, in other words. Predictions are interpretations of an interpreted past, the past being memory. Thomas Kuhn and paradigm shifts. He says that a paradigm shift is not an interpretation of past ideas, but that they work on a new way of looking at the world. My question is whether there is anything new entirely. Even colors are interpreted. Colors are the visual perception of different wavelengths of light within the electromagnetic spectrum. We perceive them when light is reflected or emitted by objects, and our eyes and brain interpret these reflected wavelengths as specific colors like red, blue, green. Color is not a property of the objects themselves, but rather a result of how our brains interpret the light interacting with them. Language is part of what separates humans almost as much as it connects people, in that it is an integral part of what is supposedly happening. Language itself creates subjectivity. It's why when we repeat or summarize what someone said, we are told that, I never said that. Interpretation is a psychological manifestation as much as anything else. Any interpretation is a change of the original, and therefore has taken away a measure of truth. But the original is an interpretation of a thought about X. So the only way something has truth is when it is still a thought that has not been actualized, i.e. spoken or written. It seems reasonable to consider that interpretation comes about as soon as words come out. But for your pains, you're going to get a poem. And it's a Russian poem, and with thanks to Olga for introducing me to this poet. Thank you very much, Olga. I've come back to this many, many times. I find it fascinating. It's a poem by Fyodor Tyutchev called Silentium. I will read it to you. I find it interesting. Speak not, lie hidden and conceal the way you dream, the things you feel. Deep in your spirit, let them rise akin to stars in crystal skies that set before the night is blurred. Delight in them and speak no word. How can a heart expression find? How should another know your mind? Will he discern what quickens you? A thought once uttered is untrue. Dimmed is the fountainhead when stirred. Drink at the source and speak no word. Live in your inner self alone. Within your soul a world has grown. The magic of veiled thoughts that might be blinded by the outer light, drowned in the noise of day unheard. Take in their song and speak no word. Tyutchev tackles truth by claiming that once it is revealed, it is no longer true. The very act of bringing it out changes it. This is contrary to the notion that once a thought is actualized, it becomes concrete and real. Yes, but according to the poem, reality is no longer the truth. So the only way something is true is only for the person who has the thought, and therefore can never be known by anyone else. This is the one and only one difference between truth and reality. The truth is not real when revealed. This puts another glean on the act of saying something that, when out, can never be put back. You know, when you go to a party and you're a bit drunk and you might say something you regret you've ever said it, but it can never be taken back. Never. Once it's out, it's out. It's much worse than that when we take into consideration the subsequent interpretation that is put about that which is now out there. You're in big trouble once you come out. It's interpreted and reinterpreted, etc., etc. All interpretation from language to language must necessarily be untruthful. Not consciously, of course. It can't be one-to-one translation. Even in one's own language, we are, or possibly are, misunderstood. This is manifestly so between different cultures. How can a translation of, for example, Heidegger mean what he meant? We aren't sure of it, even in the original German. Look at the interpretations of Hegel. I always have to mention Hegel just to annoy some people. So many interpretations that, in my opinion, reflect the psychological leanings of the people who are explaining what Hegel meant. According to Derrida, signs acquire meaning only through their differences from other signs and through the deferral of presence across time. Because of this, meaning is never complete or fully present. It's always in process, always in the past. Meaning is never fixed. Language always involves slippage, deferral, and reinterpretation. In short, meaning is never stable. And that interpretation is not just something we do, it's something that meaning is. And even what I just said, if what I just said was an interpretation of a translation, if you think that is clear in the original French, I challenge you to try it. But even in our own language, we don't know that what comes out from us is what the receiver hears. We are, folks, walking on eggshells. You'd think that our thoughts are vocalized or in writing. You'd think that the written word is clearer, but I found this to be not so, especially typing out WhatsApps, etc. The shorter the message, the more the nuance is lost. Written, typed, communication has no tone. Stark words do not contain the lilt or tone within which it is understood as a possible joke. All you see are stark, naked words. And I've been in trouble many times. They're reading the words and I'm meaning it to be funny, and I can't. They're just words. Okay? And an increasing point is that from one written language to another, it is by a translator, while in the spoken language, it is an interpreter. Think of the minefield of personal relationships. What does I love you mean? It is what each side interprets as meaning, even if they share a common mother tongue. Relationships cannot be mutual. Interpretation is a four-way field. X has a thought 1 that comes out in interpretation 2. It is interpreted by Y as 3 and reinterpreted when thought about as 4. This is applicable to parents and children, siblings with each other, friends with each other, employers and employees, Zoom participants with others, and with a speaker, the host, etc., which you'll soon see. What did you mean by saying, but I didn't, etc.? Interpretation poses a significant challenge for monism. Heraclitus, from all things one, and from one all things. If everything is interconnected as a single reality, the act of interpreting or understanding this so-called reality requires a distinct perspective, that is, an interpreter who is separate from the whole they are interpreting. This creates a paradox that monism can only be fully understood through a dualistic lens. The interpreter must be able to distinguish themselves from the rest of the interconnected reality to provide an interpretation. How am I doing with time? Not bad at all. Now I cut things out that you don't know I'm cutting out. So I'm going to finish now so that you can have your go at me. We have been discussing basically reality. We can sum it up with only interpretation is real. A paradoxical interpretation of reality. I now rest, and you can Have a go at me now. Thank you. Oh, Josh, I didn't see you come in.
When you say interpretation,
Hang on, Josh,
my
are you walking?
Of course.
Well, let us see you walk. I feel much fresher when I see you walk. Okay, carry on, Josh. Sorry. Put your camera on. It's very
Can you see?
nice. Okay. Never mind. Talk. We'll get the camera in a minute. Sorry.
Okay.
Right. Yep,
Okay. I got it on. Okay.
you're in the dark.
We can see.
I like what you said. Uh, uh, reality, you're not making a distinction between truth and reality. Uh, but I don't see it as we get along with each other, right? Because the very fact that in engaging with each other, we each are interpreting the sense of each other's words. In most circumstances, we already have that sense sort of built into our understandings of each other. And what I mean is, for most purposes, where we're able to collaborate with each other, do things together, share ideas together, we don't concern ourselves with even looking for what aspects of what maybe I mean and what you mean might differ. Those don't matter except in certain circumstances where they come up. All of a sudden, they arise as a problem. But for many purposes, uh, we simply say, "Oh yeah, you meant the same meaning as I did," and it doesn't have to be by saying. We don't have to put that to a proof. All we need to know is that we can get along on the basis of it. We can move forward with each other without being, surprised by the behavior of the other person. So that the world is just an interpretation upon interpretation means that our the best way to get along isn't to look for some sort of a nailed down rounding of truth, but to stick very closely to the contexts of interaction with each other, and to look closely within those contexts to see, are we able to get along? Do we need to clarify? In other words, so it's a kind of a flowing, ongoing, local exercise that the search for understanding, rather than trying to sort of get above all of it to try and reach some sort of some view from nowhere. And it's not.
Come out from behind the tree, Josh. I can't hear you.
I'm mistaken. What? Oh, can you hear me now?
Now,
Can you
yes.
hear me?
Now, yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. On and off.
I think it's not a lot. Any better?
Yes.
No?
Yes.
Okay. Well,
Yes.
let me just wrap it up. I was just saying it's not a loss that we don't have some view of truth from nowhere, because what we're really looking for is to, in an ongoing way, to work at as truths emerge within situations with others, to sort of find and refine those truths in the ongoing flow of interaction with our world, rather than looking in the past to see something nailed down that we want to kind of make reference to in order to verify the absoluteness of anything. Okay.
Thank you, Josh. Basically we get on with people in our own culture, but I don't know what you mean by getting along with. We get along. We chat about the weather. etc. Yeah, we get along. But if you're going to have sorry about the word, a serious discussion as we do here, you will see often that we don't actually understand exactly what the other person's saying. We say, "Can you? I don't understand." When they say, can you define your terms?" I don't know. I don't even know what that means. As I said, we can look in a dictionary. I mean, we get along generally. Sometimes we don't. But as I say, if you really want to get to the nitty gritty of things, then you start asking, what exactly do you mean by that? And if you speak to somebody from a different culture, and they speak your language, you're not actually understanding them. And I found that a lot. They understand the words, but they do not understand me because we are from a different culture. I've found that many, 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 many times. That's why I did this subject today, because this is what's happening to me basically on a daily purpose. We just the words are there. We both understand the words, but we're in different places. And I do think that we do walk on eggs, because I got very, very good friends, and sometimes we argue for no good reason apart from the fact we just don't understand the words that the other one's saying. I find that very, very dodgy. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that everything is interpreted in some way. Even if they're similar, they're still being interpreted. But anyway, thank you, Josh. It's a very, very good point. Debbie.
Yeah, well, I wanted to add on, actually. I also cannot not agree with Josh. And I was also wanting to go, of course, and in line of more the social contrast, and talk and relate to interpretation as a concept that within itself doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's within itself a social concept that is always shaped by culture, language, power, of course. And you mentioned Derrida, that sees meaning as nothing that, not something that is set or final, but it's always deferred. Interpretation always has something that has been before, and takes and goes on and on. But you have Baudrillard, who actually warned us of the danger of this interpretation, like this endless interpretation, that you go into a spiral simulation, like hybrid textual, that there's no reality anymore, and that the signs refer to themselves. So I wanted to, again, to go in the line of what Josh said, as looking at interpretation as a social contract that has limits. And these limits are defined by us, by shared horizons of meanings, shared values, shared cultures, and the more, and shared collaboration. And these boundaries we set, they're not perfect, that's for sure. There'll always be something that needs to be redefined. But the fact that we collaborate, the fact that we converse, actually does, we can avoid getting into complete relativism, because it is discussed, it is trying to get into a shared value, and not get into a hyper reality in the fact that interpretation is both ontological and epistemological. And that is, I think it's okay. I mean, it is how we are in the world. On one hand, that's the ontological part, but also it's the world that we know together, because we are finding it out through our own perception. So I wanted to actually also point out, Ron, to your last point, that you kind of dismissed the fact that we all get along and that's it. And I'm thinking that's actually quite amazing, that we do get mostly along. That when somebody falls in the streets, people do help. That I can actually, in most places, walk safely in the street and somebody, I mean, we do get along, or that a car is not actually going to aim at me. And that, I mean, I think we do get along more than we appreciate. And that's also about a matter of interpretation. Is that my interpretation of the world, my perception, or not stressing injustice and evil and horrible things happen in the world. It's the twofold in and yeah, at the end of the day, it is to collaborate. It means in this life with different interpretations of it on which we can all lean on. And that is very, very difficult, especially to maintain democracies and functioning democracies. And but this is my contribution to the huge topic of interpretation, with so many, as you stated before. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you very much. I think we got to realize when we talk about we, where the we is. But I'm not sure that everybody in the world gets on. I'm not sure the majority of the world gets on with the other half and half. But you know, it depends where you live and who you deal with and etc. I'm not sure that China and Taiwan actually get on and speak the same language.
But they don't really talk to each other.
Well, they have the same language, but they don't understand each other.
Not democracies either. So that,
true.
Yeah, there has to be some shared grounds, but I'm saying it's not an ontological or necessarily or.
Okay, thank you very much, Debbie. Yeah, you're right. We do get along. It depends on what level. Thank you very much, Debbie. Thank you, Terry.
Hi, Ron.
Hi there.
Hi, everybody. See everybody again. By the way, Ron, you mentioned early on, you said someone said there's no absolute uncertainty. Who was it that said that?
Me, most probably. I'm always saying it. The sound's very bad.
Who?
I said something like that in the chat.
Well, you were quoting someone about the person was. Ron, can you hear me?
You mean John Stuart Mill?
I think so. You quoted him early on in that.
There is no such. Where is it? There's no such thing as absolute certainty, but there is assurance sufficient for the purposes of human life, which is basically what Debbie said, I think. Is
okay.
Everybody?
I do always wonder if anyone ever asked him whether he was absolutely certain about that.
But here we are interpreting him.
Yes.
But would you say, Terry, that there's absolute certainty in science?
I was going to bring up, oh no, you know my view is pragmatic solipsism. That you see what you see, but you just look for repeatability. So I have a viewpoint that you can have a highly objective view of the world, but you always have to qualify and say, yeah, but you're assuming a lot too.
Yeah.
The old simulation analysis. I'm sure this is what's going on, but you got to start somewhere. So you take the pragmatic approach and say, yeah, it's just me, but I do things, they repeat themselves. It seems to work. I can do that over my entire lifetime. Yeah, I'm pretty confident about what's going on with that. Yeah. So I have an odd mix on that viewpoint. I'm fully fine with accommodating both in terms of pragmatism. Obviously, when I'm in science mode, you have to be pragmatic. That's what you're doing. Find the experiments and see if others agree. The thing that struck me, you mentioned this briefly, but it's not just interpreting others. When I wake up in the morning, I'm not the same person I was yesterday. I've had the experience of looking on the internet, finding some piece of text and saying, whoa, this guy's a little crazy, but I like, well, that's me. You know, and, and you realize, oh, that's something I wrote a few years ago, and you don't even agree with yourself,
Yep.
or you might partially agree with yourself. So, and I wake up in the morning, or if I've been busy on some other topic, I can go back to a piece of text I wrote just a few hours ago,
Yep.
and I can look at it and go like, what the heck?
Yep.
And I think that's fascinating. So we interpret ourselves constantly. So what do you say to that?
It happens to me all the time. I look at something I've read and I said, what the hell did I mean by that? What a load of rubbish. And I have to delete it. Deleting is very hard after you've done a lot of work on it. But I agree with you. We're not the same every minute. We're
Yeah.
all different from what
Oh,
we
but
were
it's good.
last time.
It's good though.
I suppose so.
But learning to delete your own stuff is very powerful. So how does that spin into the whole interpretation thing though? If we have to interpret ourselves, let
That's
alone others.
that's it. That's what I said. We have to interpret. When we look at the mirror, we're actually interpreting what we see. We see something subjectively. We have no idea how other people see us. No idea. All we do
Well,
is so that we're interpreting our own image.
and in fact, that one interpretation, if you want to really be picky going in the science viewpoint, what you're looking at is an antimatter version of yourself because you did a mirror image
Yep.
reflection.
Yep.
And you know, if you could really touch the person on the other side, you'd both go boom. So you better be glad the person's not real. So we interpret, you know, mirror images, and you look in your phone, you see a true image like others see. It's very confusing. Like even what we're doing right now, our images right now are not mirror images. They're more like true images. So yeah, it's fascinating, and I think it's kind of endless. So I
It
always
is.
wonder how we manage to put together.
You're wondering how we stay sane? We don't. That's why we're all
Yes,
not. We're all crazy.
that's why we that's why we
Yeah.
go crazy
Yeah,
so
yeah,
easily.
exactly. We're
Yes.
always interpreting. By the way, I can't read what you write in your down in the whatever it's called chat. The less you do, the better. Afterwards, I read them all. Somebody wrote something about eggs. I made a mistake to say we walk on eggs, which is extremely uncomfortable. I meant eggshells. So whoever pulled me up on that, thank you. We do not walk on eggs. If we do, we slip.
If you
Thank you,
walk on
Terry.
it, if you walk on eggs, the yolk's on you.
Very good.
Ah,
Very
very
good.
good.
Very good. Thank you, Terry. Thank you. Kerry, welcome back to the land of the whatever. Is everybody's camera stuck or is it just mine? Can anybody hear me? Everybody's frozen. Hello?
Reminds me of which. Oh, I've got you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I was just going to say that the framing of the discussion so far reminds me a lot of later Wittgenstein, where words are squishy, and it depends on the context, right? That we're using them. I like your word, Ron, approximate. I was thinking indeterminate, but maybe approximate is better, because there's this idea, I think that when we try to agree on our definitions, what we're trying to do is increase the focus a little bit, and reconcile which language game I'm playing versus you. I mean, when we look in the dictionary, a lot of times there'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different meanings, right? And each one is subtle. I mean, we couldn't learn language unless there was overlap, right?
True.
And this dovetails with reality nicely, or I'm going to put reality in quotes based on the chat.
Good.
Yeah, right. Because we have experience, but then what we make of experience is all about interpretation or creation or narrative or prediction. I think that's in psychological circles, calling our brains prediction engines is kind of the, du jour term these days. So that fits nicely with Wittgenstein. So there you go. That's what I've got to say so far. Thank you.
Okay, very interesting. Yes, yes. I'm not that keen on Wittgenstein, but your point fits in very, very nicely. Very good. Excellent. Jean. Jean, just when you're on, you disappeared. Okay, she'll come back in a second. So, George,
And to,
wait 1 second.
oh,
Are you? Ah, there you are.
I thought it was my turn.
Okay. Hi, Jean. Sorry, George.
Hi, I was in the bathroom and I ran right back. So,
Okay.
right. Thank you, Ron. I don't know. I think you're from Australia. Is that true? Anyway, I go to a lot of Zoom groups. I've been to a lot of meetup, and this is the most articulate presentation I've heard from anyone on any subject. Um, I I'd like to use it. I'm going to start a group on this. It's not going to be on Meetup though, but I'm going to start a group that goes on a long time on the subject because I think it warrants more than just a 2-hour discussion. And I would like to use your introduction as a beginning presentation for my discussion, which is a big compliment. At least, I feel very honored to have heard your presentation. So, reframing. This is really important to understand. Uh, it we framing is an aspect, of course, interpretation is involved because we choose a different framework. If we're actually choosing a framework or unconsciously, we frame things in a certain way. So it's still a matter of interpretation, but it's a different way of looking at it. And this is how I see it. We are animals. We have that aspect, which is very primitive. We're creatures of nature. And that's what philosophers get stuck on. They get stuck on this nature until but I don't basically framing is a contrivance as is interpretation to help us function. So I don't know if Ron, if you've ever heard of the approach of the middle way school of Buddhism, which is the school of the Dalai Lama, not the lower schools, what they consider the lower schools of Buddhism, and every school considers itself to be higher. So the approach is called the two aspects of truth, and it's exactly what you're talking about. And the way they and it is a functional contrivance. The way they frame it is that there's two aspects of truth. One is the way the brain naturally works by subject and object, and they call that conventional truth. And then it's when we have to see ourselves or on some level separate from the object of what we call the object of knowledge, what we're looking at. The second aspect they call ultimate truth. But ultimate truth is not ultimately true on one level, because we're looking at ultimate truth through, again, our own thinking, but it's a concept is the object that we're having is the object of knowledge. So that is still conventional truth. So the way they present this teaching is that two aspects go hand in hand. They never can be separate. That's ultimately true. And the problem with the way people think, including myself, is that we tend to think our own thinking is ultimately true. And that's called in the Middle Way School of Buddhists, they call it the knowledge obscuration or the knowledge obstruction. And they don't even focus on it that much in that school, which upset me when I realized what was happening. But then I finally did understand it's because they just focus on conventional activity like kindness and stuff or regular activity more, because it's next to impossible to see through the knowledge obstruction, though it is technically possible. And that's one of the characteristics, according to them, of being what they call a Buddha. And all of this is conventionally presented. It's just a way. And if people do look at AI is not that clear in presenting this. And then if you go to a lower school of Buddhism like Theravada, or what they consider to be a lower school of Buddhism like Theravada or Zen Buddhism, they do see ultimate truth as being ultimately true. So they call this using, in the Middle Way School, they call this approach using life for the path. And another thing they call it is a consequence school or approach. And to finish this, the consequence is a result. And if you want to test for gold, you look at in a subjective sense, sure. The best way to do it in terms of one own functional interpretation and how well it's working is to just evaluate the results. Again, which is subjective. So I just think the topic is so important. And it's just virtues. It's just, it's so, I don't know how you got interested in it. It's so clarifying. One problem is that people will tend to fall into nihilism, and it's going to be probably limited depending upon the results, which are not going to be that great for the average person, myself included. So it's just a different way of seeing things. It's very clear, and if you study it, it's exactly what you're talking about, Ron. And the school is based on that approach, the two aspects of truth. So ultimate truth, we're always, when we look at that concept, it's not ultimately true, but the consequence, our actions, is a different way of framing it, approach acts of humanity and kindness. Then one can get hung up on, one can attach to that too. So I'm not articulate at the end here, but maybe I'll speak again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean. Thank you. George. George, can you hear me?
Ron.
There's a very bad connection this evening, today. 1 minute, it's so unclear. Is it only unclear for me or for
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, now yes.
No, I can hear him, Ron. But everybody's been breaking up every now and again. You have
Ron, what I'm going to say is that, and I'm going to be strident, I'm going to be pointed. Don't take it the wrong way, but everything you said is just completely wrong. I mean, it's just, no, it really is, because, I mean, ultimately, how could we possibly have even this conversation? How can we have a global economy which is highly sophisticated if we don't fundamentally have an agreement on the reality that we're seeing?
Yeah.
So, I mean, the issue is that and again, I mean, and I understand, I mean, this is actually a tragedy in philosophy. It's funny, well, this is my point. I'm going to say, and it's actually a tragedy for humanity, the view you're offering, because what you're trying to say is that really there is no philosophy. What you're saying is that there's only psychology. And so philosophy is about that world that we do see, and making inquiries about the world that we do see. Right? This is why science is philosophy, because you're making inquiries about the world that we do see. Now, broadly, what happens is that I think there's a false bifurcation between empiricism, science, and metaphysics, which is to say that, okay, there's a science of constructing chairs. The metaphysic is, why do we see chair? Why do we collectively see chair? Right? Just to point to that. I mean, the other thing is that, I mean, again, I find this baffling that you say that we don't agree. One of the interesting aspects of the contemporary period is, what I call the Netflix phenomenon, in which we watch television, movies from all over the world, right? And we understand the conundrums, we understand the moral decisions, underlying actions, right? I mean, those characters and those plots are completely transparent to us, regardless of whether it's made in Africa or in Europe or in East Asia. I'm a huge fan of Korean television, by way of example. And so, again, you're being disingenuous to the point of false to say that Taiwan and mainland China don't understand each other. They understand each other perfectly well. They have a very powerful meeting of the minds. They know the issues at stake, right? Taiwanese autonomy or independence, or not? Is Taiwan going to be part of China? To say that they don't understand each other is really quite baffling to make that point. And you know, I'm strident about this because, right? I mean, you know, analytic philosophy, I always argue, is a source of ignorance, right? Because the issues facing humanity are so monumental that to be caught up in these, right, non philosophies, oh, it's all solipsism, it's all your mind, and it's all internal to your mind. And so yeah, if it's just in your mind, right, then I can understand the logical conclusion that, oh, you can't really, we're each playing our own little games. It's a kind of solipsism. We're all playing our own little games in our mind,
George,
and then everybody else is playing little games in their mind. But
one
that's not the world.
Can I just interrupt you for 1 second? Here is an example
Yes.
of you not understanding a word that I said. You've reinterpreted in your own mind, and now you're coming out with it, and you're telling us we understand everything. If you're right, there is no literature. Why do we understand all books, all poetry? We don't need any interpretation. We understand all the films. There are no film critics who say that's good, that's bad. He meant this, he meant that. No, we understand everything. That's what you'll say. Forget about literature. Why do you need literature? We all know what it says on the page. All of us, don't we?
You're being disingenuous.
Okay.
Because what all of a sudden what you're falling back onto
I'm not
is philosophy, right? You're falling back on philosophy. So in the first instance, you're taking the position of pure psychology. Your actual position is that sir, you know, I write a book. I understand that there's things in that book that I see that only I see that you don't see. That's your point. And no one else
here's
sees.
an example of you not understanding what I said. Here's an example. I never used words like that.
No, but
I never said I never said I only understand. I said that everybody understands it differently. I don't understand what you're saying now, but other people do. You obviously think that you know what you're saying, but you don't, because I don't know what you're saying. Because I'm saying there is literature, and I think we do see things differently, and you keep on putting things in my mind, which is exactly the point I'm making about interpretation. Your interpretation is all right as far as you're concerned. You're right now, right? You're correct.
Because no, it's not a question of again, you are, first and foremost, now you're deflecting, now you're gaslighting. What I'm saying to you is that we do have a fundamental meeting of the minds. Okay. And so we do,
based on
even the very question, let me finish my thought, which is this is the important point. We can agree that something is literature, right? That's really the important point. We can just agree that something, again, I repeat the example, something is literature. Now, we're going to read that literature, right? And again, we can have a meeting of the minds on the literature. What were the plot lines? What were the characters? Now, the philosophy comes in where you start to say, look, I didn't like it because of these choices. And I thought that these choices the character made were questionable ones. Somebody else says, no, I understand those choices. However, I think the choices were justified by X, Y, Z. So the fact that we're having a conversation about the literature proves that we are having a meeting of the minds, that we are seeing the same phenomenon.
Well,
language will be impossible.
You're saying that we all know what art is, right?
I mean, again, the problem I'm
asking you a question. I'm asking you a question. Do we all know? Do we all agree on what art is?
Listen to me.
I'm asking you a question. Please answer. Do we all agree on what art is?
You're just deflecting. Okay. I mean, in the end, there are going to be debates about art. The problem is that you are saying, precisely because there is philosophy in the world and people have debate about art, right? Oh, we can't agree with. I mean, you said, shockingly, that China and Taiwan don't understand each other, which is a bizarre claim. It is really a bizarre claim, right? Or that you can't have conversations with people from other parts of the world, which again is a bizarre claim.
No, I can't have conversation. I cannot have conversation with somebody from another culture because we don't understand what our words mean. It's simple. But anyway, it's okay. You're right. You don't have interpretations.
That's bizarre.
You know.
That's
fair.
bizarre.
That's fair. That's fair.
That's bizarre.
Okay.
I've been all over the world. Even Zoom. Look, there are people all over the world that connect on Zoom and we understand each other. It's bizarre to say you can't understand them.
We're not
It is. It's a
understanding
bizarre
each
claim.
other. We're not understanding each other, you and me, at the moment. Right?
No, because I understand you perfectly well. No, I understand you perfectly well.
I don't think so.
I mean, that's what I'm responding. I'm responding perfectly well to what you're saying.
But I'm not saying that. But I'm not saying that. That's the point. You know you're right. You
said right now that we don't understand each other. How is it that we don't? I understand what you're saying, so I don't understand.
You don't. You have just quoted me about a number of things I never even hinted at. So we don't understand each other. You're interpreting what I'm saying.
Let me just be clear. You said that China and Taiwan don't understand each other. You said that you can't have conversations with people from other cultures because you don't understand each other.
Yep.
You said
True.
that you said that we're not looking at the same reality. You said that
there is no reality.
Okay, exactly. So you're saying again, I don't understand how the global economy functions then. How does that happen if there's
I'm very pleased you do. Perhaps you can explain it. Well, perhaps we can assume you can explain the global economy to us, which we'll all agree with. Would you like that?
I mean, it exists, right? It exists, correct?
Okay. Can we move on, please? We don't understand each other. It's fine.
I understand you very well.
Actually, you don't, because I know what I said, and you're disagreeing with me. Your interpretation is off, but it's okay. It's fine. It's your interpretation. You're entitled to it. This is what the whole thing is about: interpretation. You're just proving it. But thank you anyway, George. James.
Hello.
Hi there, James.
I'm going to issue an apology before I start.
No.
Yeah, I listened to this time. I listened to almost every point you made. I made notes on almost every point you made. But I also prepared myself with notes before the meeting, so I'm not going to be that. I hope I'm not going to be that confrontational. Not that it's bad to be confrontational.
No, it's very good.
Yeah. I'll just go over my notes. It really has to do with one of the things that you mentioned in the description was the fact that there could be both the factor of the theory of knowledge, right? Epistemology and ontology. That can be important. And there are a lot of philosophers that stress ontology, but of course, we know Kant was a philosopher in the 18th century that, leading on to following on a revolution in scientific and philosophical thinking, where he devised a more or less a epistemological system that was based on empiricism and skepticism and a kind of ontology of the mind that he studied and logic. So I think a more ontological approach, as we know, was followed by Hegel. And I'm going to give I've been reading a lot of Hegel lately, and I'm going to give some of my interpretations of interpretation. I think it's a universal, following what I learned reading Heidegger. He saw it as a universal factor in thinking in general. But I want to say that for me, it includes an event, an interpreter, and a listener. There's three different things. Entirely reflexive, regardless of the state of intercommunication between parties. Even if you're just simply looking at a static, inert object, it's still a kind of an event between you and the object. So there's a kind of like a leveling of the concept interpretation there. It doesn't just involve subjectivities of individuals. The event constitutes a living being as a whole, to be part of it. It can refer to a natural event object, or process, as I was just indicating. It can also refer to a historical period. The point is that the event becomes objective to the interpreter, who acts as the subject discussing a viewpoint relative to the what happened that results in a what determined what and the causality of that event or events, or else a what determines what in an object or a non-organic thing. A subject discussing viewpoints requires a second subject, listener, with their own viewpoint. And that's a problem, maybe we call that a problem in intersubjectivity, but that's a factor of interpretation. That interpretation always proceeds from a viewpoint. Having an interpretation means communicating causes relative to the phenomena recorded by the interpreter as an observer. So there is a chain of causality involved. An interpreter has to have been an observer of an event, or at least be privy to information forwarded by some observer or person privy to facts about an event. For a listener reacting to an interpretation, there can exist correspondences and differences of interpretation, resulting in an affirmation or denial of any specific interpretation. Interpretation, therefore, is the crucible of civilization. It is where opinions meet, and individuals have an opportunity to act similarly, differently, or even against one another towards expanding their sphere of knowledge and action. Ideas don't simply disagree with one another. They contend in interpretation. I'll just skip to a little quote from Heidegger. I already said he might be he's the first philosopher I know about that's distinctly talked about interpretation as a universal practice. Maybe we can glean more about that from Kant or some other philosophers. But, and also I know Aristotle touched on this subject. And also probably Plato, more than one interpretation may be available which are not identical. In this case, it is similar to the case where observations by interpreter and listener are independent. We can use third viewpoint analysis, add few further tools. That would be scientific of us to do that, I think. Heidegger gave an interpreted triad of actions. They are foresight, number 2, anticipation or planning, and number 3, attention. Another such tool is Hegel's mode of difference, which takes the differences of perception and time and the dynamic nature of the models we have of things into account. That's ontology. These are two philosophers that used ontology as methodologies in solving philosophical problems. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, James. That's interesting. As you know, I'm more epistemologist rather than so I have quite a lot to say about what you just said, but your interpretation of Heidegger was very good. And anyone who thinks that they understand Heidegger without interpreting, there are so many books on Heidegger, all with different interpretations, even in German, obviously. But anyway, thank you very much. Olga, hi.
Hey, hi. Thank you. This was very great presentation and fantastic presentation from my point of view, and interpretation of what actually you're seeing, because what you're seeing in your interpretations also different from each other. So kind of nobody could really stand on something very firmly. But I also would like to say that I agree with everyone who is on this side or on that side, because all have the point of view that create our shared, whatever we call reality. And I just wanted to say that for example, there is in linguistic, there is hypothesis. It called Sapir, who a hypothesis that even language itself influences worldview and our cognition. Although there are other people who call it hoax, for example, very known scholar John McWhorter from Columbia University, he said that it's hoax, that everybody from all nations speaking different languages see world the same. So this is the question, and the whole the different philosophical school established on it, and people have classes and students learn it, and then they became followers of that or for that school, and we have this again shared reality. And but I wanted to say just one small thing. I again, I'm sorry that I referred to Russian culture, and some time ago I read a quote from who it was said by a composer, Russian composer Alexander Scriabin. What he said: if it's I could not find the resource, I could not find what he said in Russian, I also know only English interpretation, translation. He said, if I could know everything, I would violate my individuality, which exists only in isolation and as a relationship to all else. So for me, how I interpret it that's our personality, our individuality defines not by our our knowledge, but our limitations, but not what we know, but what we don't know. So we have our interpretation in personal interpretation because we don't want to know something and don't want to know because our knowledge not always may in many cases just limit us. Is it? I am not sure if it makes sense for you. That's probably what I wanted to say. I could repeat what he said. That's it.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting. I need to learn more Russian poetry and literature. It's a gap in my general.
No, it's not really possible because it's very, very difficult to translate. It's extremely difficult to translate. It's
I know.
It's that's it.
So is Hegel.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Olga.
Okay.
Boris, hello.
Hello, Ron and everybody else. First of all, I'm very happy that despite everything, and I know it's not been easy, you're on the air again. Here we all are meeting up. I think it's quite amazing. And Ron, you ought to be congratulated on putting this all together. That's the first thing.
That's it. You can stop now.
Right. I've just got a few sort of thoughts that come through my mind. And if only you could see into my mind, you'd realize how many stupid thoughts come in and then go out again. But here are a few that I'm gonna pass over to you. You can't see in my mind, can you? I was just worried for a moment that maybe you could somehow see it in my mind. All right. Interpretation obviously refers to language, doesn't it? I mean, whether it's translation, the written language, or interpretation of the spoken language, and actions without language don't involve any interpretation, do they? Well, maybe they do.
Can I answer that? What, because you're asking, is it okay if I give an example?
The question was rhetorical, but I will.
It's not. No question.
I will bow. I will bow to your imperial presence and say yes. Okay.
No questions are
say
rhetorical
something.
as far as I'm concerned.
I dare you.
No. Hang on. You said that it's only language. I'll give you an example of what happened to me a few weeks ago. I was speaking to an Arab speaker, and he was making a lot of noise, and I said, shush. It was like a joke. They're making a lot of noise. I said, shush. And he looked at me and he said, what did you say? I said, when? And he said, you use that noise. I said, well, yeah, it just means, So he said, do you know what that sound is among Arabs? He said, when you go shush, it's the sound we make to our donkeys when we want them to do something. And he was really, really upset. And I went to him and I explained, it took a long time. I explained to him that it doesn't mean anything at all. I explained that we use different sounds. And I told him about Italian. If you do this in Italian, it's quite rude. And somewhere else, it just means stop. And it took him a long time. In the end, we hugged and he understood. But here's an example of not language. It's a different culture. It could have been language. It wasn't.
But I would suggest that even your shush was language, not involving words, and indeed body language is another example of language which does not involve words and requires an interpreter. As you said, in Italian, whatever you did means whatever it means. And in some other culture, it means something quite different. As a matter of fact, I generally sort of mention that I'm a dentist, and I have come across the situation in which a Japanese patient who is in pain will laugh. Laughter is an expression of "I'm in pain." Yeah, I didn't realize it at first. It had to be interpreted for me. And that's when I sort of understood it. But what I wanted to say was, if only we would just shut up. If we would, philosophers, all they do is talk all day long, or else they write it down and then somebody else has got, oh, hell, got to read it. Why not just be quiet and do things? And when you do things inside yourself, you don't need an interpretation. I mean, you can if you want to. You can start wondering, why on earth did I do such a silly thing as that? But you don't have to. You can just act, and the actions seem to me to be much more universal, I would say, than the words and the meanings of them and so on. I also try usually to mention death at some point, so I'm going to try and introduce it here and say that death is interpreted by people for all sorts of things, whether it's final, it's not final, it's a passing to another stage or whatever. But when we die, that is, I know that when I die, that if you call it an action, I'm not sure if you call it an action, it's a cessation of action, that requires no interpretation on my part. it will simply be something that happened and the world ended for me. That is without interpretation. So I'm not telling you, Ron, be quiet. What I'm trying to say to you
Very
is,
difficult at the
don't
moment.
talk such a lot.
Can I get back to you on that death thing?
Well, go on.
I disagree, obviously.
Well,
When
naturally.
when one dies, one has got nothing to regret. One is dead. There is no interpretation when one is dead. There's interpretation of other people about the person who's dead. But the person who's dead is not, just isn't. There's no interpretation. There is nothing. It's the only thing that's not interpreted by the person.
Precisely my point. I'm so pleased you grasped it in the end.
My interpretation was correct.
I'd rather not answer that question.
Okay. Thank you very much, Maurice. Richard, thank you for being so patient.
That's all right. I always feel quite humble is probably the wrong word, but it's close enough when I listen to everybody else, because I'm very aware that although I have read many of the people that are mentioned here, philosophers, sociologists, whatever, I've forgotten most of them because it was over 60 years ago. I do find that when we talk about language, the fact that you, Maurice, and myself all came from the same area of North London, and Maurice and I went to the same school, that it helps us understand a certain amount. But I'm also aware that when I once met a friend of mine had caught camels in the Australian bush and brought them back with the help of a couple of Aboriginals. And one was an old man. And when a mutual friend had a sort of party as he came back with his group of camels that had been brought thousands of miles, I tried to talk to this old respected member of the Pitjantjatjara tribe. We were using, well, he was using Pidgin and I was using my normal English, which maybe even most Australians didn't understand. And it was very, very difficult. But we did agree on two things. One was grog, in other words, beer, and the other was smoke, in other words, tobacco, mostly because he wanted another beer or some of my tobacco. But I understood from my friend Greg that without him, they would have almost certainly perished in the bush because they wouldn't have found water. I mean, we are talking about the 1960s when, you know, Australia wasn't covered in the network of places where nobody had mobile phones, for instance. If you got stuck without water in the desert, you actually died. And so they did agree on a certain reality that allowed survival. Now, when George was talking, I found I agreed far more than I do normally with you, Ron. I mean, I'm not saying I disagree. I sort of sit on in the middle somewhere, which reminds me of what Jean was talking about when I think she was talking about the Madhyamaka. But basically, I see one side and I see the other side. And yes, I do understand materialism, but language, the difficulty with language is that everything we say is based on metaphor. And our metaphors aren't always translated with the actual words. Now, to go back to you saying, defining your terms, the problem is everything itself. What is everything? It's two words. It means that it's a materialistic world that you're talking about. And then is interpreted by whom and for whom. Okay, now going back to the metaphor, I was thinking while you were talking, we live, the more it's a closed system that we think of, because everything is constructed on our minds, I agree, a subjective, we have both a subjective reality, and when I disagree with you is that there is an objective reality as well. It's just that we all see it in different ways because we are confined to grills, to cages. And so I thought of a fish bowl. Well, not a bowl, a fish tank, if you like. And we're all fish swimming around. And the boundaries are the glass walls. And we can define the objects within it, the sand, the plants, the other fish, and they can be defined. And then we have something which is without the boundaries. Maybe there's a demon, and that's probably a paw that comes in and tries to pull the fish out. Or there's a god that drops food in because they come from outside the closed system. And you can't understand them because they're not within your definition of what reality is. And I have talked to people who believe that there is something that is real. I don't mean a religious reality, because, you know, the real with a capital R is different from the real, but they believe that everything outside, well, George's idea. And within the chat, I was saying, well, the banking system isn't real. Possibly when it was based on gold, it was closer to reality, but now it's just based on promises. It exists purely in an imaginary world, but we all go along with it, and so it works. And some people are wealthy and other people aren't. And yet, really, are they wealthy or not? In fact, the only way you could define wealth would be if you own land and animals, or maybe other people. And you only own other people if you can control them. It's everything is based on what we accept and what we have as common acceptance. But I do think that science and logic, and I'll bring up a philosopher nobody else ever seems to mention, but who, when I was a young man, really influenced me, and that is. Sorry, I've lost you.
No, you're still talking. It's fine.
Okay, everything went blank for a moment. Somebody else broke in and then it went blank. Okay, you're back anyway.
Yeah,
But in Russell, and I do believe, and I know we've had it, that the trouble is I see language in two ways. I see it as someone who like bad poetry, and someone who would like language and logic to tie up together. And I know enough about both philosophy of language and linguistics. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Both about philosophy of language and linguistics to know that that isn't actually possible. But you have to exist. I mean, you brought up a subject that I have struggled with, but not being fairly lazy and retired and having forgotten far more than I can remember. I must admit that my struggles never lead anywhere, both sides. And the only way I can see anyone surviving in this world is living in a world of, I think it's consonant dissonance. Basically accepting both ideas, going backwards and forwards and sitting on the fence all the time. I think I'll leave it there and let everybody else criticize all they want.
Thank you very much, Richard. I just want to make one point, which a lot of you will leap at me for, because every time I say it, I get shouts of whatever. The whole point of what I was talking about today is about so-called reality. And I call it so-called because people like you, Richard, talk about there's reality, but we got different ways of looking at it. And I'm saying no, it's because we have different ways of looking at the world, completely different ways, apart from the ways that we commonly talk about in the same language, only in the same language, not necessarily in the same country, by the way, but the same dialect of the same language. To say that we all look at something differently and there is a something, I am saying, no, there isn't. It's because of the problem of everybody seeing things differently, because of the subject today, there cannot be a reality. And every time we talk about reality, we're talking about something that just isn't. But that is just me. And all of you will hate me for it, which is okay.
Oh, Ron, we won't hate you. And maybe George got worked up.
Okay.
But the thing is, apart from the way that social media has got the modern world, we're all here because we enjoy an argument that helps us express our own ideas and clarify what we think and so on. But to me, the key to this is parallax, whereas to you, there is no, say, church spire that we're all looking at from different places. I think there is a church or a cathedral or whatever, a mountain somewhere, but we all get different views of it because we're confined within our own grills, and we're confined with all the perceptions that we've been brought up to. And as I was saying, you, Maurice, and myself share rather more than we might with most other people, because we're roughly the same age. I can remember Maurice vaguely. I think he can remember me vaguely. I never met you, even though we had lots of friends in common, but we went through the same things. I mean, I dropped out and became a hippie, and you went on and became a philosopher. I hated law. You did what I should have done and went to Oxford and studied philosophy and linguistics, which is much more fun than law. But I wanted to go and try to be a cowboy, basically riding around on a horse. Okay, can I change it? I will come back for a moment. Am I here still? Can you
You're
hear
still
me?
here. Yes, you're still here. You still exist, whatever that means.
I was watching the Women's World Rugby Cup, and as you know, I played rugby to a reasonable level when I was there. But I watched
with women.
Not with women. No. I mean, in our day, at university, there could be a women's team. That's about the only place you could find women playing rugby. But when you're playing, you can't see. Well, no. Okay, most of the time, you're too connected with what you've got to do, who you've got to tackle, what you've got to do. If you're a wing forward, it's really it's all rush. If you're on the wing, this is the same for all sports, basically. You're connected with your job, what you're trying to do. But once I was injured, and in those days they didn't have substitutes, and after about 20 minutes they bound up my leg and I went back on the pitch because I said I was ready to, but I couldn't run. Now, if you're a speed merchant and you can't run, you're not much point in you being there, but it's better than being down to 14 men rather than 15. So I changed over and became the fullback. And all of a sudden, I could hardly move, but I could see the game because I was slow. And that, to me, actually conveys some form of being inside the system, the closed system of the game. The rules are confining and everything else. But all of a sudden, and the only way, and I couldn't run if I got the ball, but I could still catch it and I could still tackle people. And so long as there's someone I could pass to, I couldn't kick it because I'd fall over if I tried to kick it. But seeing the game from a strategic point of view, and I would like to bring up something there actually. If you were a Gaul or a Briton, to be the war leader, you had to be in the front of your warriors. If you were a Greek or a Roman general, instead of having to be the bravest and leading your troops, you were at the back working out strategies. And I won't say it's totally objective, because after all, if you lose, the Germans or the Gauls or whoever will still kill you and you'll still, but being back and able to watch the battle, and I know the fog of war makes it difficult, but you could still make decisions and change your strategy. If you're leading, all you can do is try to fight against the nearest opponent. And if you're killed, your side will almost certainly run away, even if you were winning.
That's a very interesting point you made at the end there, Richard. Very interesting indeed. It's a thing between looking at something very close,
Yeah.
or looking at the whole thing from far, and they're completely different ways of interpreting what, I won't say what there is, I would say what there might be happening. And I agree, that's very interesting point. Thank you very much. Thank you. Tim, thank you for your patience.
Okay, thank you for calling on me or giving me my chance. Okay, so before I how can we say configure what I had in mind and try to relate it to the conversation here. When you say there is no reality, there's no reality because we're all only imposing our own interpretation of what reality would be, so they're all not really reality, all of our interpretations? Is that what you mean? To elaborate?
Yes, but I only put that in as sort of at the end. But yes, I think that yes, that would sum it up, because I think that's what I talked about, reality, which there isn't if we all look at it in a different way, which we have to, because we're individuals. I can't see
Okay.
any way of getting out of it. But okay.
All right. So first of all, I would propose, how is it we can even, using language, could we really communicate with each other using language? Because language, and there's even the saying, right? The saying, a picture, it takes 1,000 words to make a picture. And I wouldn't say 1,000 words, I would say an infinity of words, because words have limited meaning, right? But to put an idea into words, a word can never, because it has limited meaning, it can never put the meaning, the idea, it can never be exact, because the words are limited in meaning. You've experienced yourself and you couldn't put, the words weren't good enough, at least on an occasion or whatever. Okay, so I'll just continue, or okay. So therefore, if we are to communicate, if there is really communication, we must be communicating beyond words, or looking from another perspective, beneath the words, through, how can we say, unconsciously. Maybe other people that are have more awareness, they might be more aware, more consciously aware of what's happening with our feelings, right? We have a feeling, and the idea is interrelated with the feeling, and then we translate that into words, and then we convey that to the other, right? So communication, if we're really to communicate, we're going to have to communicate without the translation of the feeling idea onto the next level, where it reduces it into words. We're going to have to communicate beneath that level. Okay. Let's see. There was something else I was gonna say here. Okay, and then the thing about not being able to really, you alluded to that, that people can't really, they're not really, they don't really well, at least you alluded to the foreigner, because they have their own culture, can't really understand. I would even take that a step further and bolster your statement and extend your statement out to everybody, and say we really could not understand each other if we're only speaking in words, because of what I just said previously, because words cannot convey. It's a limitation of what's being translated within the person. They have to translate that feeling idea into words.
Okay, very interesting, Tim. Just have you finished? Sorry.
There was something
Sorry.
no, it's okay. I was waiting for a while. So it kind of, person has to try to really focus their strength onto when one's time will come up. So there was something else, but it's kind of not right there in the forefront of my mind. So, what, you were going to make a comment then?
No, you can always come back. It's okay. No, I just wanted to say that the answer to your question, which people keep on asking, how is it that we can understand each other? The answer is approximation. We understand each
Okay.
other approximately
Okay.
close enough for it to be okay. It's when it gets really serious that we just stop understanding each other. It's when countries go to war because they do not agree with a fundamental language that each is talking. There's war on nothing except for not understanding what somebody else is saying. It's pointless saying the words are the same. They are the same, but they're understood differently, and that's it. basically we get along as we do here because we understand each other approximately, and then we ask questions and we're trying to find out do you mean this? And I say, no, I don't, or yes, I do. It's all a matter of approximation, which is what, as far as I'm concerned, everything's about, including science, etc. It's approximation. It's good enough. It's good enough to get along, but it's not good enough if you want to translate somebody like Hegel, who everybody's got a different interpretation, and nobody can tell me that they know what Hegel said. Nobody. There's so much stuff being written about it. Why is so much stuff being written about Hegel? Nobody understands him. I'm not sure Hegel understood himself, to be honest with you, because try it in German. His language, try it. He writes, and Heidegger writes in such difficult German. It's so difficult, I think on purpose, by the way.
Okay.
You just don't understand him.
I recall something now, okay, that what else
Yes.
in relation to this interpretation, and then this will interrelate with perhaps with your saying that there isn't really reality in quotation, or at least we're not perceiving it or something. Okay, so I would propose also okay, people aren't going to like what I'm about to say. I'm a very radical person. If you remember me from the last time, right? Do you remember me from the last time? All interpretation has to be wrong, because interpretation would be projection of one's own, how can we say, one's own knowledge of what another is saying. Okay, so my knowledge is never knowledge that I have already acquired. There's going to be nuances at least of what, say, for example, Hegel would be saying, and then it's even one step even farther beyond, because a person couldn't speak directly with Hegel anymore. Okay, so even communicating with a person to interpret is to project onto what another's saying. So to get to the closest a person can get to understanding the other is to have no interpretation, and for the other, if this is possible, for what the other's meaning to, as it were, to enter one's mind, and then directly then one knows some kind of a communication, dare I say telepathy, but the point here is it would have to be direct, the direct thought, the direct feeling of the other person to know what that person would be saying. Once there's interpretation, it's already going to be moving away from what that person's saying, because it's projection of one's own knowledge, and one's own knowledge isn't going to be right. It's not that person. It would be my own. It would be that person's own knowledge. Okay. All right.
Thank you very much, Tim. Very, very interesting. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome.
Frank, very patient. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I, personally lean more towards an aspect of how you describe it, Ron, in terms of the goal of language is to arrive at some approximate agreement on what's outside of myself. So I think, back in terms of the purpose of language, I do approach it from an evolutionary psychology perspective, and recognizing essentially that I am the product of a couple of million years of biological evolution, a couple of tens of thousands of years of cultural evolution, and about 75 years of personal experience inside of a certain culture with a certain biological makeup, right? So there's a framework. And, what's the purpose of language? I think early language was more simple, right? I mean, it was, people were developing internal mental desires and goals, but they ended up, like all of us do, with, encountering something that's bigger than any one person can accomplish. So, there's this a small mouse, I can capture myself, right? I can feed myself. But if I want more calories, I need to think in terms of a bigger game, which I might not be able to conquer by myself. So language is a method of gaining collaboration with people around me, people who are close to me, who essentially share a lot of the same culture and biology that I do. So we have a starting point of understanding, as Michael Tomasello, famous, developmental psychologist, talks about, is the first thing was shared attention. You and I, because we're in the same place at the same time, we can point to something like a big game. And then the second thing then was that can lead to shared intention. I'm hungry. I'm pointing to that. Directing your attention to that, and that we start developing this approximation. Maybe this person is trying to say, let's work together to get that, and we both are hungrier. Is that exactly what's happening? Of course not, right? Because as somebody said, as Maurice was saying, I can't really read your mind, but having a theory of mind is a critical aspect of our development as humans, right? Having an idea that you have an idea, and that if I point to something, I'm asking you to direct your attention to that. I am in a roundabout way transferring something that's in my mind to your mind by pointing, right? So are we both seeing the same, bison or whatever? No, but we are seeing a good enough approximation so that we can work together to get something that's going to feed both of us better than we can ourselves, right? So that's pretty straightforward. It's not controversial, but we build on that to getting to a world where, Western civilizations solved a lot of the problems of hunger, shelter, clothing, and started to education, right? So then we started coming up with other kinds of questions bigger than can you and I bring down the bison? You know, um, the basic fundamentals of meaning in life, right? The good, the true, the beautiful. The good, the true, and the beautiful. Can't point to that, right? It's harder for me to get a share true and the beautiful because I can't, I can't point to that that. Then I have to use my language to ask the question, what does it mean to you? I mean, notion about questions, Ron, I think was right on. So the idea of trying to say, maybe there's more to life than, working together to kill the next bison. Maybe there's a purpose. What's my idea of the purpose? What's yours? How can we get together to do that? And that's easier. That's easy and hard to do. Richard was talking about the fish tank, right? And I just was recently reading this notion about you know, the two young fish swimming in the same pond, and an older fish swims by, older philosophical fish swims by and says, "Hi guys, how's the water?" And they say, "Oh, fine, great." The old guy swims by, and the one fish says to the other one, "What's water?" You know, I mean, the whole notion that we are instances in a specific culture with a certain biological underpinning leads us to a certain view of the world that we kind of take for granted. So when Richard was talking about taking a step back and looking at it from a different perspective, that's one way to do it. When Debbie was talking, you know, we were other people were talking about, going to the Middle East and it's not true there. I went to Texas a little while ago, and I couldn't believe the number of people who were barring their door because they were so convinced that Mexicans were coming across the border to rape and kill them. I don't have that view in where I am in Chicago. This is not, you know, Taliban, Middle East. This is Texas. These people are convinced that they've got to do something drastic, otherwise they will be killed and raped. It's imminent. So I guess I'm drifting off a little bit there. I wanted to just, come
Not
up to
at
the
all.
notion that I do believe that there is an objective reality. I do believe that our language is a pure approximation of that, and that we have a desire to see if my approximation is similar to yours, because I think that's how way we get a better approximation of what's out there. So let me just leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Just one tiny thing. I don't think that how close you are to somebody and how not approximate it is, the two people will not have the same reality,
Right. Yeah.
however close they are,
Yeah.
because they're individual.
Right.
It's
But it's
subjective.
more similar
Oh
than when you're
yes,
further apart in different cultures.
yes,
So it's a starting point, and it actually is a source of some confusion, because then you assume the other person does have the same
correct,
perspective
correct.
more than you would assume if it's somebody from a
You're right.
different skin color, different religion, different clothes,
You're
different
right.
accent. You assume that they may have a different view. When everybody looks like you, talks like you, and wears the same things that you do, there's this bias, that they're going to see the world the same way that I do. And boy,
Definitely.
I shocked when I went to Texas and I saw the people who looked the same as I do, wore the same clothes, had similar accents. I have a Chicago accent. They have a Texas accent. But you assume that they see
Yeah.
the world the same way, and you can be surprised at how different people are.
But you do realize that those people in Texas, that's their reality. It's reality,
Absolutely, right?
right?
Yeah,
That's
it
the
was a
only.
shock. It was shocking, right? Yeah.
Yes. It just goes to show. Thank you very much. Very interesting, Frank. Thank you. Michael, you've been very patient. Welcome, and off you go. It keeps on
Thank
stopping.
you, Ron.
One minute.
Very much how language is approximate. I look at it as words are a tool used to share an idea or ideas. And sometimes you can, just like having a hammer and a screw, for those of us who are mechanically inclined, a hammer and a screw, you can use them to join two boards together, but it's not the best choice. So people can use words to join together an idea when it will work may not be the right, which relates both to your Ron, your previous idea of true. And if the goal in one language is joining two boards with tool, both word sets ideas would work to join them. So in which case both interpretations would be true. So that's really how I view language, is that it's very much a approximation. And even your earlier reference of the shh concept, which to me meant please be quiet, that sound is a communicated idea that I would like you to stop talking. Even if you may have all watched, I'm Italian, I use my hands. You may have seen me using my hands even during, and my words are communicating my idea, my hands are communicating my idea. So just because the vocal patterns rising from my mouth are something that you are taking internally, hopefully the idea that's in your brain matches the idea in mine, but it won't be perfect. And so that's really how I view language. Is it's very much in my brain to your brain. There's going to be miscommunication. And jumping all the way back to the poem that you introduced, Ron, I really found it interesting. I had a different interpretation where I felt the poet was trying to express that you could have an internal feeling and lack the words to translate that internal feeling, not that your attempt to translate it would change the internal feeling. So that's how I viewed the poem, but that was just from listening to you. I could be wrong.
No,
So
that's interesting.
that was everything I had to say.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Michael. Very interesting. Very interesting. Josh. Hi.
Yes.
How you doing?
Yes. I'm doing great.
I can see.
Wow, getting my intellectual stimulation and my physical stimulation anyway.
All
Yes.
coming together.
That's right. It's interesting with this talk of understanding as approximation. There's the implication that it's something we have to settle for. We have to settle for less than what we want. We don't want approximation. We want precision. We want exactitude. We want certainty, but we have to settle for approximation. But there's other ways of thinking about understanding. So people suggested that that the need for interpretation just doesn't involve relations between people, but even between me and myself, I have to interpret myself. So let's say in understanding myself, I have to interpret. Does that mean that my understanding of myself is only approximate? Well, people here would probably say yes, if they're being consistent with the arguments that have been presented here. But so an alternative would be this, is that to mean anything, to intend anything, is to produce something. You produce it out of a past, out of a history, out of elements of a past, but it's producing something new. Anything that doesn't do that is not meaningful. It becomes invisible. So what people here are calling an approximation is actually the very essence of meaning anything. To mean anything is to produce something new. It's a creative act. Now, the problems that people are concerned about here, that it's bound up with what they're calling inexactitude, or approximateness, is misinterpretations, the gap between us. And here again, they're back onto might be called Cartesian thinking of subjectivity as something that goes on inside the head, mind. We're locked inside ourselves, and we have to get out in order to interpret other people. But that's an older notion. In fact, Frank's notion of biology comes from one of three popular ways of understanding how we understand other people, other minds. One is what's called theory, which is what he laid out. Theory is that we consult an inner script or consult inner concepts inside of our own mind, and then we compare it with someone else or use it to interpret them. The second is simulation theory. We watch how they're behaving and we sort of imitate it, and that's how we understand them. The third is called interaction, which means we don't have to consult some inner script. We are out there in the world with them. We can directly perceive things like emotions and such, but through an interaction with them. So this third way gets rid of the notion of the mind as inner calculating process, as a kind of a representing the world the way that the computer does, but rather that we're an ecological system that understands through interacting. And interacting is a productive activity. We enact our world through our interactions with it. And this is where it becomes very important, because really the issue that you're raising by saying that reality, there is no reality or there is no truth of reality, which again, I would agree with in a general sense, raises a huge ethical issue for many people. People that are holding on to the notion of an objective reality that we all, access in different means, like, the blind people and the elephant, they can use that as a way to ground ethics. If even if just through science, even if they abandon the notion that we have to focus on ethics in terms of sort of moral values apart from our epistemological understanding of the world. They can say, well, just through, maybe scientific understanding, but nevertheless, they're holding on to the notion of a grounding in something objective, which has independence from our struggles. So that's the issue. Is there a way of being able to hold on to a different way of understanding ethics or different aim for ethics if we abandon this notion of making use of reference to some sort of a independently objective world? And I'd say the first step is this, and it comes from moving away from this inner subject towards a recognition that from the time that we're in the womb, we're already in an intersubjective environment, a normative environment of some sort, involving our interactions with a mother and their interactions with the people around them. So our own personal, most subjective concepts are already shaped and informed by that normative, directly by that larger normative environment, which is why that we are never simply, blindly, solipsistically, autonomously individual, and then have to struggle to come to understand other people. From the time that we are born, we're already immersed, even before we learn language, in a kind of we're integrated within sort of social normative patterns. It doesn't mean we work in lockstep with them, but they guide us. So there is no skepticism there. But then that raises the other issue. Well, that's true within our local environment and even the more extended environment, but eventually we'll come across some community somewhere in the world whose thinking is so alien to ours that brings up the ethical problem, right? So the question there is, what direction do we go in? If we cling to the notion of some sort of an objective grounding, then we're going to eventually blame them for something. We'll find something to say, you're wrong. Your thinking is ethically wrong or it's scientifically wrong. And that will lead to the kind of cycle that we see, endless historical cycles of blame leading to punishment and wars. Another option is to say, well, the aim isn't to look for an objective reality, but it doesn't necessarily have to be simply to accept our differences. It can be that we can try to continuously engage with one another, not just to change them, but to change ourselves in the process. That the aim should be this continual flowing sort of moving into new ways of understanding ourselves through the interaction, starting with what we do have in common, even with the people that are most alien to us on the other side of the planet. We recognize them as human beings. We can see them communicating with each other. We recognize that they have language. We see them crying and laughing. We recognize that they have feelings. We see them caring for their young. We're realizing they have that. So they're already on a very general, way. We have these shared bases and we can start with the most peripherally shared basis and then use that as a basis. But it has to come from a willingness, which itself must come from the recognition, from the abandonment of the focus on the objective in favor of one of moving out to expose ourselves to what is alien, to want to celebrate being changed by the alien rather than warding it off in favor of the objective.
Thank you very much,
Thanks.
Josh. Two small things. We don't always get what we want. And
Thank you, Nick.
I mean, it's one of the things in life. We might want a lot of things, but that doesn't interest me. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not particularly interested. And the fact that things happen that we don't like, and the fact, I don't like to word the fact, but the possibility that things are approximate and that's why they work. It's not that we accept it and we would prefer it to be different. That is the way it is. It's approximate. And I can't see any way of getting out of that. It's approximate because we are individuals. However much we are similar, each one is different to everybody else. Different. It might be widely different or it might be similar, but we have to be different. We have to be. There are no two people in the world that are the same. It cannot be. And the second thing, which I've now forgotten, so yes. Do you? I don't mean you personally. Do you think that you understand yourself better than you understand other people?
A little bit, but it's not. It's not a rule.
Little bit is cheating.
No, what I mean is that I don't understand myself. There are many, many times where I'll say, no, I have to re-examine myself. It happens all the time. But if I compare the process of that re-examination to the struggles I have with others, I can see the difference. They're on a different plane with respect to each other. In both cases, there's a struggle, but one struggle is more challenging than the other, usually, not always, but usually.
I think it's more challenging to think that one can understand oneself. It's like looking into a mirror, that you can see very, very clearly what you look like, but you actually have no idea what you look like. The same as self. You can't come from the self from inside yourself. You'd have to come from outside. I reckon we understand other people better than we understand ourselves, but that's another topic altogether. But anyway, thank
Yeah,
you very much, Josh.
you're
Thank you.
welcome.
Thank you. James, back on the
Wow.
stage.
Okay, that was great, Josh. I really liked that relating interpretation to culture. Very important point. Um, one of the things that I noticed, Ron, just a little kind of like a quibble here aside, is that I just basically every time this comes up, right? German philosophers. So if there's a German philosopher, this philosopher from another culture, kind of like a sister language.
I can use French as well if you want.
Sorry?
I can use the French philosophers as well if you want. If you
French philosophers as a criticism?
if you object if you object to my using German philosophers, I can use French philosophers with the same problem.
As an insult. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, no, okay, next time it'll be in
Okay.
strictly insults. Yeah, I
Okay.
understand.
Next
But
time.
anyway, yeah. But the point is that the language does cause a tremendous translation problem. No question about that. It always takes like 60% more words to communicate in German than it does in English. As one example, one point. If you ever go to a German, go to Berlin, go to any museum, and read the descriptions. They're in German and English, and the English is always 60% of the size of the German description. But the point is that so there's always a translation issue of some kind, and this happens with all philosophers, of course, because philosophers are so dense. And I was just going to mention that maybe the German or some of the German philosophers are actually discussing many more things than other philosophers from other countries are discussing, and that constitutes reasons for interpretations varying. In other words, there's so much variance in their subject matter that the interpretations of their discussions vary. So that's all I was going to say about that. The 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 I was going to mention on this idea of epistemology. It's very good. Epistemology is wonderful. Of course, it constitutes some of the impetus and some of the reason for the mistakes that were made by Kant, and some of the attitudes that we have, which I would say are non-productive. But it also explains ideas that we have about theory of knowledge that are constructive. That, in other words, the idea that Kant had that there might be that reason might be aiding understanding. That, in other words, we find reasons to think, which in turn help us think better about things. So the epistemology can come in handy, but it's not the only mode of interpretation, because since it's more relevant to understand events as everything they are constituted by, and the effects and natures of affecting things, both static and dynamic, within their sphere of effect and actuality. If we understand those things, we're much better posed to begin to think about them. So that's why ontology is so important. This is the reason So it aids, and ontology is important because it aids analysis and reason. So it's really important to not dismiss the role of ontology in creating ideas in general, including epistemological ideas. In the sense that psychological experience interferes with interpretation in a way that makes it non-objective or unrealistic, if you will, it should, to that extent, be rejected in discourse, although it can be said that purely subjective ideas can be introduced into interpretation and agreed to the extent that subjectivities are commonalities. And this is just completely natural, that you could say this is unscientific, or maybe, but it's a natural effect of language and society on people's thinking. These ideas could be called biases, which cause interpretations to fall in favor of raising importance and protecting the interests of a class of people, not necessarily a political party, but even a professional class, such as government workers, professors, clergy, scientists, or others. This is a case when interpretation leans towards predicting system collapse. And people are expected to follow the interpretation without reservation in order to save the system. We have some of those memes that go around, right? If you don't believe in this, you're not going to help. You're going to be part of the problem. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. That expression. When these interpretations become government-sponsored memes, possibility of official misdirection or public skepticism are valid factors to consider. So I just it's the and it's also that's kind of like one of the I'm just gonna we haven't nobody has been discussing that, but that's the thing that I think is very important is there's a slippery nature of interpretation. Interpretation can simply follow public biases and doesn't necessarily have to follow a course of correct reasoning by the interpreter. So it's really up to us to explain ourselves and to use an understandable methodology by the listener. People who listen to us, people who interpret us, they have to understand our language and be inspired by it rather than only disagree with it. And in interpretation, disagreement is one of the keys. Agreement, disagreement, both constitute natural reactions to interpretation. So anyone dealing with interpretation should be willing to form discussions and like that meetup that Gene was talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Are you implying, or more than implying, that the more people agree on something, the more right it is? I don't mean right. I mean the more correct it is. Because you said
I don't.
No.
No, I don't think that the people that are discussing an issue are going to arrive at the best possible solution. What I do believe is that the results of action on knowledge is going to move civilization forward. It generally always has, and we can consider that a mechanism, a civilizing mechanism. In other words, communication, discussion, and even cross-cultural discussion, listening to people from other cultures, listening to, and understanding multiple points of view, not simply carrying water for one specific organization or political or philosophical theory.
You stepped on an eggshell with the word knowledge.
Really?
Yep, because people have got knowledge, which might be off, and it might sound terrific, but it's problematic.
Yeah, in that sense, people are objects. They're basically we're all similar. We're all in the same position. When we say that AI is great or AI is evil or people are going to suffer because of, let's say, the president or bankers or something like that. If we have knowledge that we're trying to express, it's neither good nor bad. It's just simply a viewpoint. And the more viewpoints that are shared, the more likely it is that people will come up with the correct context for their own thinking about things. And it's just simply, it's the encounter between an interpreter and a listener that really creates the possibility of knowledge transfer, which is essential. And
Only,
it's just, having knowledge is not a bad thing.
it depends
It's
what the
just
knowledge
even
is and
the
whether
fact that it could be wrong, it's not bad. It just simply creates the context for human discourse and more of it.
if it's allowed.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you. I
Okay.
appreciate that, Ron. You run a great ship here.
Thank you very much, James. George, George, before you make your point, can you please make it gently? There's no point coming in and insulting me. It puts my back up, and we always have a quarrel. If you can speak the way other people speak here, it would really help. I don't mind you disagreeing with me, but don't put my back up because I'll just argue with you, and you want to make a point, no point. Go for it.
Well, when life was created, the very first life, it had to have knowledge of food. It had to have knowledge of nutrients. Right? There's no trial and error here. They knew it, right? They were born, if you will, with the desire to procreate, the will to survive, right? And so the process of life going further, right, is that animals they're born with, again, what is food, what is nutritious for them, again, water, they recognize predators, humans have knowledge of love, have knowledge of greed, have knowledge of fairness. And that's the actual evolution. And I don't even like the word evolution, but that is the process by life and the way it operates. Right? We have all this pre-knowledge, and indeed that's Noam Chomsky's point, that language is based on pre-knowledge. Right? We have concepts of love in our mind. We have concepts of tree, and what we do is, as we're born into this world, we know tree, we know cliff, but yet again we're introduced to a certain language, and hence we utilize those words to again discuss those things intelligibly. And this is the basis of human existence, human civilization, which is global. And indeed, there is no barrier. There is no barrier between nations in terms of understanding. I mean, there are no actual wars where people are just talking past one another. Okay, we can't seem to agree on anything, so we're just going to settle this with a war. That's not what happens. People understand exactly what the issues are and why they're fighting. And so, that is the reality we live in. It is not a reality where each one of us is groping like we're blind. We're blind and we're just groping through the dark and just trying to figure things out. And we're trying to have a conversation with someone else and they're blind too. And, so again, the fact that we can have a meeting of the minds, the fact that we could coordinate our activities across centuries, across time and space, the fact that people do make popular culture, movies, and films in places like Korea, and they're popular in the United States, proves to us that we understand each other. At the most fundamental level, we understand each other. I mean, the other side to this, the danger you run into is one of xenophobia, which is to say, oh, those people understand the world differently than us, right? Oh, Mexicans, they don't understand hard work, they don't understand determination, right? And so, again, some of this can turn on xenophobia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. Olga. The stage is yours.
Hey, hi again. First, thank you again for organizing this, let's say, illusion of shared reality, that we could argue about these very meaningful things and topics around it. Thank you. Okay, so I probably would like to make some points that I really don't really already remember exactly what Debbie said in the beginning, but when she said it, it just came to my mind that everything that we are doing, it's just we're doing for our survival. Survival, for example, in particular environment of the city, or the desert, or in academia, for example. For example, in academia, they have to create some kind of new some kind of new, maybe controversial theory, and then stick to it, and then have students, and then to create school around it. So they have to. They probably don't even want, but if you already part of the system, and it goes to what James Cook said, that about collapse. If system collapse, it means they won't survive. So, and I, for example, was the part of collapsed system. I lived in the Soviet Union, and when it falls, and when we see this collapse and how we had to adapt to add other things and many new things, and had again create illusion of shared, let's say, illusion of shared reality. And then I came to United States, and so it's absolutely different reality. So and and for example, I I'm working on big project that dedicated on this to the subject of time, and then I organized some time ago the whole conference and exhibition around it, and a lot of different people like scientists, artists, filmmakers, philosophers participated in it, and they act like they understand each other, but they don't. They absolutely live in absolutely different world, but they had to act that they like they understand each other. And right now there are very popular this interdisciplinary. I'm kind of interdisciplinary person, in cross-disciplinary person, people that kind of try to move in these gray areas and try to connect, because we went to so different directions with all these areas of knowledge that people absolutely don't have any idea what other people doing, but they have to kind of get along with it. Because again, because system will collapse and we won't survive. And now we have a really difficult situation when everything starts depend on electricity. If it's collapsed, that everything collapsed. We won't be able to survive at all, especially in cities. So that's what I wanted to say, that right now we have one more small thing, that but everything, it's if we take into this discussion like our natural environment and animals, and say, do trees and forests have, plants have shared reality? Do animals have shared reality? Yes, they also create something like this because they have to survive. So it's much more complex topic than kind of what we now discussing, what I am thinking about. It does not mean that I came to some conclusions. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Olga. Thank you. Anton, you're very patient indeed. Good to see you again.
Hello,
Anyway.
I made it. Yeah. So I think I'm usually brief anyway when I say something, but I don't have that much to say. It's just one of the more interesting things that's brought up. I'm going to be reading kind of from some notes. I think I interpret, if I understand Tim correctly, one of the things that he said, part of what he said earlier was that if we can communicate beyond words or distinct from words, such as directly emotionally, or we have some internal sense of what the other person is saying or communicating in a group that way, it's a more precise way of communicating. And I hadn't really thought about that before, at least not in that nuanced way. But that does make sense that, for one thing, I think that that's possible, but that does also make sense to me. However, I'm not saying that words do not have value or that words, and not at all. I mean, I think words and language do a lot. And in certain cases can communicate to a precise degree as precise as we can try to get it, as was mentioned by a couple of people in the meeting. And I also was mentioned before that this can happen across culturally. I think I like somebody said it. I think it might have been Josh. Part of what Josh said, that if there's some commonality, even if there's cultural differences or ethnic differences or whatever, in understanding things, then you can, if there's no commonality at all, either between two individuals or two groups, then you're not really going to be able to communicate. But if there's some commonality there through language or through certain experiences, then you can communicate. And then just whatever level of barrier there is, just all depends on how much of a discrepancy there is. So those are some thoughts that I have.
Thank you very much, Anton. Thank you. Tim, you look like you're the last one.
Okay, thanks. All right, so I had a thought about directly what your proposition about how, let's say, you affirm, I'll say it that way, that there is really no reality because we will have our own interpretations if a person would want to have an interpretation. You see, I've let all interpretation go because I would have to be according to what I said before, right? Because it would always be wrong. Okay, so the thought, so what occurred, what I had, what occurred to me was, okay, so interpreting reality, this, let's say this alleged reality, right? Right, like you say, it couldn't be because it would be just the interpretation. But perhaps a real reality exists beyond our interpretation, right? So I don't know, it's kind of like maybe being, how about Socrates when the people were in the cave? You remember, and the one guy he saw out, how somehow he was able to see outside and see that the cave with the shadows, it wasn't the real, it wasn't the way things really were. You remember, you read that about that Plato or
Plato.
Yeah. Okay. So then in this context, we would be, so then if we could be seen as all those in the cave, and if this real reality exists, it would exist outside of the cave, so that if we could somehow go beyond interpretation and see directly this reality, if there's a one, you want to say something, if there is really a reality beyond our interpretation. Okay.
Why would you think that the ones outside are the real reality?
Oh, well, okay. So the guy, so that's the implicit meaning here, right? The parable, we'll call it, where the people in the cave, they weren't seeing what was outside. So that was the meaning, right? They weren't seeing what truly was. So, but even the guy who could see outside, he might be even in a bigger cave, right? So he might be seeing a bigger thing, but still something exists beyond that. So at least there could be something real but we could perceive, if we could go beyond our interpretation, then how can we say come closer to perceiving it, experiencing it directly?
The most dodgy word in English, apart from knowledge and is and it, is if.
So what other word then should, what other word, or what else, what other way could it be worded?
Well, as soon as you say if, I mean, that's it. What do you mean if? If doesn't mean if is a hugely problematic word.
Oh,
a lot of languages use a complete different form
okay.
of the verb with if, because
Okay.
it's so weird.
Okay. So in other words, I didn't want to, how can I say, in quotation marks, affront you and say that there was a reality. That would be, I felt that would be not in a negative form, but kind of abruptly coming close. And I didn't want to just go ahead and say there was a reality. So I say, if there was, then if we could get beyond our interpretation, then we could get closer to perceiving the reality that would lie beyond, if there was a reality, not wanting to affront what you said, that there was no reality. I wanted to be, without being affrontational, to coin a word.
Okay, if there are fairies at the bottom of my garden, I can then create a whole theory about fairies.
Okay. In other words, I may say whatever, I can say whatever I want to conjecture that there may be a reality. But the point is, how can we know if we are stuck in our interpretation? If we are the people in the cave, in Plato's cave, then how are we gonna know whether there is or there is not?
We won't. That's the whole point.
Okay,
we won't.
But the point is, if we can get beyond interpretation and connect with it directly, if it exists, then direct perception of it. So that's right. So it's not necessarily conjecture. I'm allowing the possibility for it to exist.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. I thank you all for coming and for taking part in this with all our different ways of looking at the world. We seem to have come to some conclusion that I'm not sure what it is, but that's the whole point. And I look forward to seeing you all next month. Thank you very much for participating. Bye, everybody.
Hi. I wanted to ask you to send me chat, because I cannot read it when everybody discussing. I cannot read chat. Could you please send it?
Yes, I'll send it to you. Definitely.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.